Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
Wednesday morning. Uh, Springtime is rapidly coming to a close. Um, we are about 5 months away to the midterms, and uh, a lot, a lot unsettled. We don't
Yeah,
know. We still got a bunch of primaries in front of us. We still don't know exactly what the legislative scorecard is going to be at the end of the day. Um, Inflation is still running rampant. You know, I, I've had multiple times this week where I drive a street more than once in a day, and the number on the gas station sign has gone up
yeah.
from the
I
first time I
just
drove down the street to the second time I drove down to the
I
street.
just had a conversation at the Sheets yesterday, filling up my car, and the lady, on the other side of the pump said it went up 30 cents while I was at work today, or something like that.
Yeah,
I don't pay attention to the prices. I mean, I know that makes me sound elite. I probably don't know what a gallon of milk costs either. It doesn't mean that I have a lot of money. It just means that I just don't pay attention to things. But anecdotally, this is being talked about. Like, someone came up to me randomly and started complaining about prices at the pump just yesterday.
I mean, I've always been someone who uh, I tend to downplay gas price inflation because it tends to be its own thing.
Yeah.
It tends to not be can I say connected to what's going on in the economy generally, so it gets overblown. And even still, I mean, we're having some excessive gas price inflation because of the war in Ukraine, not because of economic policies. There's other issues with the economy that there's other inflation going on, but I think gas price is still kind of in its own world, um, and they always fluctuate. So um, I tend to let it roll, but e- even when we had high gas prices in 2008. This is the drill baby drill time, which everybody forgets was on Bush's watch. It wasn't you. Democrats didn't cause that gas price spike. Um, it wasn't so relentless. This is the first time I can remember like every day
Yeah.
I'm seeing a not just like a couple penny jump, like a big jump.
And and I think the context too is it's coupled with baby formula supply
Mhm,
shortages and inflation of everything,
mhm.
and then I think it's a general sense that we're losing control, whether it's mass shootings or whether it's just violent crime or shoplifting. All of these things are combining to give us a Carter-esque feeling vibe. And I
Well,
think the gas prices. By the way, the woman said, her dad owned a gas station. This is like one of those like conversations that sounds so fake. You know what I mean? Like the woman said, like, I remember when I was a girl and my dad owned a gas station, and it was in the 70s, and they were rationing. You'd have to, like, every other day you could get gas, because it depended on your license plate number, and there were the lines. And she's like, I hope we don't end up there. Again, anecdotal, but it is a real conversation just from yesterday. So it feels overall like things are coming undone. And then the context of that, Bill, to get us back to politics, you have the January 6th committee primetime hearing starting tomorrow night, Thursday night, about a very real and important thing. You've got a report from, I think, Jonathan Allen, that Donald Trump is considering getting in, throwing his hat in the 2024 election ring this summer, maybe in July. So you've got this candidate that I think Democrats view as an existential threat. We've got this, hearing starting about, I think, a very serious thing that happened. But that feels like the least of our concerns right now to a lot of Americans. It's a weird time.
Yeah, I do feel on one hand it's unfair to say this all proves that Biden is terrible, because I mean we've gone through a whole lot of things as a nation in not so recent history that are even worse. I mean, the crash of 2008 was worse. There's like a zillion things under Donald Trump that were worse. I mean, the onset of the pandemic was worse, and his handling of the pandemic was worse than I think Biden's ever done with the pandemic. Um, George H.W. Bush,
Yeah,
the way he handled the Iraq was horrible. We've had all sorts of horrible things going on. What's
Democrats
that?
are the party of government, right? They're supposed, they're the party that says government can do things. And I also think, fair or not, there was an impression that Trump is a man of action and that Biden is this guy who's sort of sleepwalking through the presidency. And I'm not saying it's fair, but what's happening now is reinforcing those narratives.
I mean, Biden might be, even if Biden did everything perfectly, it still might be a bad year for Democrats because it's a midterm and bad things are happening. But I do think the way he has handled things, he's not giving the impression that he is in command. And there's always this sense of sort of being a few steps behind what's going on. Baby formula is an example of that. And on one hand, I think you objectively say, hey, give Biden credit. He's asked, when did he know? And he was like, and he said, he said, these people knew about these things. He said, they did, I didn't. That's kind of a straightforward, no BS answer. He's not trying to pretend he knew things when he didn't. The downside of that is it seems like he's not on the loop. And, and part of any presidency, and this is a challenge for not just the president, but president's staff. I mean, when you work for the president, the judgment call you're making every day is, do I move this information up the chain? Is this something I need to put on his desk? Because every president only gets the worst stuff onto his desk. Maybe it's the thing you're saying, this is really bad, but I know what we got to do here, and I don't need to put this on his desk. Does that mean that person made a bad decision? If that person did tell Biden a month earlier, would different policies have occurred? I don't know. But the impression, the perception is that he didn't do all he could on this score. And it's not just the one thing. He's been in a situation where basically ever since Afghanistan, it's been one thing after another. And some of these things, like the worst stuff about it, I mean, as bad as the Afghanistan pullout was, Afghanistan is not terrible for us right now. It's not become a hotbed of a Al-Qaeda 2.0 launching terrorist attacks on us. I'm just saying, as of this point, that hasn't happened. When Biden said that, Putin has to go, and people, oh my God, he's going to escalate things. Well, we haven't had a nuclear war because he said that. It's still the same stalemate that it was before. But you haven't had something that happened where it seemed like, okay, Biden really nailed that one.
Yeah.
It's always one little thing after another where he seems like he's not fully in control, and that's leading. Again, it might not have meant he could have solved everything if he seemed a bit more in command. It might not have meant that inflation wouldn't be here, or there wouldn't be mass shootings. I mean, every president has had mass shootings since Columbine. But it does make it trickier for him to convince fellow Democrats he should be the guy in 2024, which can lead to a period of dissension after the midterm election, which will likely not go the Democrats' favor.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that Biden is to blame for some of what has happened. For example, inflation is something that some of it is caused, obviously, by supply chain issues. I do think that it has been demonstrated, or seems to be the case, that some of the spending that Biden did also aggravated or compounded the problem. I think that Democrats, whether they stoked some of the violent crime and incidents of crime nationwide with their talk about things like defund the police and some of the district attorney's policies, or whether this is a cyclical thing. It feels like you could argue, well, look, all these things are cyclical, but like crime was pretty much at bay for like 2 or 3 decades. And all of a sudden it came back once we let our guard down and started electing these progressives who wanted to like decriminalize things or not prosecute.
Well, I mean,
I'm just giving you one example, Bill. I think there's a whole spate of things, right? Inflation, the same thing. We thought inflation was over, that was something of the 70s. And it does feel like, whether it's just bad luck or whatever, that, a lot of these things have come roaring back. And Biden, I will say this, I wrote a column, not that I matter, but almost every one of these issues, I wrote something warning that this could happen. And Biden, in every instance, said, nothing to see here, nothing to worry about. This happens every summer, whatever. Like, he didn't take it seriously. The border, all that stuff.
Well, I would not lump inflation, crime, and border in the same basket. I think with inflation, I think there's a fairer argument to make that Democrats were too cavalier about it with the rescue plan. I don't think the economic debate is wholly adjudicated yet. It's true that there's inflation worldwide that clearly pandemic supply chain related. So it's not like it's only America that has it. But at least in 2021, inflation was worse here than some other countries. And so you can make an argument. I'm not saying it is the argument. I'm saying you can make an argument that the American Rescue Plan was an overshoot. And we're learning now that the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen harbored some private concerns about that and wanted a smaller package. She pushed back whether she urged a smaller package. There's some semantics going on there, but it seems like she harbored some private concerns. What exactly she did with those private concerns, that I don't know exactly, but it's not, some Biden defenders will say, hey, look, our growth is good, our job growth is good, wages are up. It's hardly the case that this has been a total disaster. And I think that's a fair point. But you can't pretend inflation didn't occur. It certainly didn't help with inflation. And it's possible that 1.3 trillion might have hit the sweet spot better than 1.9.
Yeah.
And Democrats at the time, to your point, were being openly dismissive. Oh, inflation's been down forever. And
they wanted to spend 10 trillion. They wanted to spend like way more than they did.
Right. So in that regard, I think that's a relatively fair knock.
Yeah.
With crime, there's no evidence I'm aware of that the cities with progressive prosecutors have bigger crime spikes than the cities that don't. There's been a general increase in crime. I mean, San Francisco, where we show what Chesa Boudin more, and I'm not a big Boudin defender, but San Francisco is hardly the worst place with crime, because San Francisco's crime data is pretty good.
I don't know, Bill. I do know that their violent crime rate, or their murder rate is actually no different, or it hasn't spiked in recent years. But I think when it comes to things like shoplifting and things like that, again, another anecdotal. This is a totally anecdotal.
It's a perception thing in San Francisco.
Perception is reality. And my wife, totally anecdotal again. My wife was in San Francisco about a year ago for like 2 days, just 2 days, staying. I don't know. It was like a Ritz-Carlton or a Four Seasons. I don't know where. Somewhere nice part of town, nice hotel. In front, she's like walking outside. Some guy is like running from the cops, and they're chasing him, and he like slams into a pole or something. And she witnessed this like right outside of this nice hotel. that's like her. She doesn't want to go back to San Francisco. I mean, that used to be a destination place that people wanted to visit, and it just feels like it's completely lawless now.
Well, I want to go deeper into San Francisco, but first, I just want to point out there's been a bump up in crime generally that's not concentrated in places with progressive prosecutors. Democrats in general have not run far left on these things. They have not generally embraced defund the police. You know, they elected Eric Adams. They reelected the more moderate Democrat in Buffalo. They rejected the defund the police ballot measure in Minneapolis. They nominated Joe Biden, who was the author of the 1994 crime bill in 2020. I think it's, you know, I saw some headline, you know, that San Francisco sent Democrats a message. They already had that message. They had that message the whole time. I mean, Chesa Boudin, I'm going to pronounce his name wrong. He just barely won in 2019. You know, they've ranked choice in San Francisco. He had like 35% in the first round. He won the third round with the secondary votes with 50.2%. You know, it was never a big mandate. And San Francisco is a place where, you know, they have far left candidates all the time that generally don't win the mayor's race and don't win the other citywide elections. So it's a little overblown that San Francisco is like this utterly, you know, uber woke place that has no ideological guardrails. Boudin's a little bit of a fluke. And even though, and he tried to rely on the fact that the aggregate data was actually pretty good, but he missed a couple things. One is you had these higher profile shoplifting incidents that were getting caught on security video and getting spread around virally, which were disturbing to retailers as well as shoppers. I mean, it's somewhat akin to public mass shootings. I mean, we've actually had a spike in shootings in general in the pandemic, but you go for that 20-year period where crime is going down and violent crimes going down.
Yeah.
But you still have a public mass shooting, everyone would still.
Well, the same thing with when the police shoot somebody, or when the police beat or shoot somebody. I mean, statistically speaking, a rare occurrence, and yet it feels like every year or so we get a video that is egregious of some horrible atrocity, and it just feels like it's happening all the time. And obviously, anytime it happens, it's unacceptable. But it also does create the impression that it's ubiquitous, and it's really not.
Well. I mean, it also like any kind of terror attack, like if it was domestic terror, international terror. I mean, when it's done deliberately, it's designed to inflict mass trauma. Like that is the evil point of doing it. For those who are getting caught on shoplifting videos, and they're not necessarily trying to create a mass panic about shoplifting.
It's also, Bill, I would just say the videos are disturbing on multiple levels, including, you know, the brazenness of the people who are doing it, and the permissiveness of the authorities and the so-called adults in charge. It really it's not just an example that crime is rampant. It's not just, you know, hey, you should be afraid, but it's also a sign that, like, we are impotent, we are helpless.
Well, and Boudin tried to handle that by pointing fingers. Hey, I'm just the prosecutor. Right. If they don't arrest the shoplifter, what can I do about it? Which is, you know, on one hand, a fair point. And I should also say there's the biggest viral video. This guy had this brazen smash and grab at a Walgreens. The guy actually did get caught, and he was prosecuted, and he was sentenced. But Boudin was talking about how the arrest rate on the police was really poor, and you shouldn't be blaming me for this stuff. And I think the political mistake there was the average voter doesn't want to see the prosecutor in a public argument with the police. They want to see them working together to fight crime.
Well, let me draw a quick parallel there, Bill, because Joe Biden recently, and I wish I had the quote in front of me, but Joe Biden recently said, like, when it comes to inflation, like, there's nothing I can do. And the public doesn't want to hear that either. And maybe he's right at this point. Maybe, and again, I think that he's not just a victim of circumstance. I think he is responsible for at least some of what has happened. But he may be right that there's not a lot he can do now, but the public doesn't want to hear him say that. They want you to try, right? They want solutions. They hired you to do a job, and I think the same is true with the DA.
I don't think Biden was that blunt. Where it's like he said, "There's nothing I can do." He's trying to say, "I am doing these things, but the biggest responsibility is with the Fed, and I support the independence of the Fed to do things about it." I mean, inflation's a kind. What's that?
I want to take the time to pull it up, but let me just. I want to circle back to a point I made at the top of the show, Bill, because I think it's important. It's a point I keep making in my writing, and I think it's important, but maybe it's not because it doesn't seem to really catch on, or maybe it's not profound. Maybe it's just obvious. But my point is this: if voters, so the way that Joe Biden won is that there were all of these people, like kind of like college-educated suburbanites, who tend to vote Republican, who turned against Trump, right? And I think they were gettable. And that's kind of the way that Biden won, is by capturing a lot of those voters who I think were gettable. But for those voters, preserving liberal democracy is like this abstract, esoteric concept when it's compared to, oh, the price for everything's going up. Oh, I'm afraid that I'm going to get mugged on the street or get raped or beaten on the street. Like right now, it feels like, oh, my gas prices keep going up. Like I go to work to make money, and when I come home, I lost money because gas prices went up. Like these issues are more tangible or more, to these kinds of voters, and like so they take precedent over like the idea of like, well, maybe Donald Trump is eroding the social fabric. And that was 2 years ago anyway. And I think it's a real problem for Democrats. They have
we have two international examples here. We're not the only place with inflation. Other places have it too. We've had the recent France election and the Australia election. In France, you had a center-right third party president running against a far right, Trump-like figure in Le Pen. And in Australia, you had a more, Republican Party-like government. They're called the Liberal Party, but they're really conservative party. There's probably the Liberal National Coalition. Been in party for a while, up against the Labour Party, and the Labour Party leader was kind of a Biden-esque figure. I think a bit more of a progressive origin, but definitely had sort of moderated and seemed kind of like a regular guy, not necessarily the most charismatic guy, but a regular guy. And in France, Macron was able to say, "Hey, you may be mad at me, but I'm going to make some changes. I hear what you're saying on the left. I'm going to adjust some things. I'm not going to be as harsh for this economic remedy as I was going to be. And by the way, this Le Pen person, she is nutters. She is insane. You don't want to go down that path." And that worked. That worked for Macron. In Australia, there was this one debate that they had where the Labour challenger was saying, "Oh, we're having all this inflation. Prices are going up. I think we should raise the minimum wage." And the prime minister said, "You can't do that. That's inflationary. If you bump up wages, and the prices are gonna follow." Which you might say, that's economics 101, but politically speaking, that was really stupid. And so the Labor people were trying to say, these people, he's being callous in the face of all this squeeze on our cost of living. And again, the guy himself, the challenger, just wasn't a crazy person. So it is possible for nominating people who are too out to lunch and blow an opportunity to flip seats, which is why I had a piece in Real Clear Politics yesterday. You look at the emerging slate of candidates for the Republicans in the Senate, they're, I'm not saying they can't win. I mean, obviously the political wins are in the Republicans' favor, of course. But you look at Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, who had a 48% unfavorable rating among Republicans at the end of the primary. J.D. Vance in Ohio. Ohio's not even supposed to be a pickup opportunity for Democrats. And I'm not saying he's going to lose, but we had a poll come out and it was a 2-point difference. And J.D. Vance's unfavorables were worse than Tim Ryan's unfavorables. You have...
and I would say good Democrats. I mean, I think Tim Ryan is about as good as you could get in Ohio running for that seat. And Fetterman, although... Bill, I'd love to know your take on his health condition, but from a branding standpoint, Fetterman seems to be a pretty good kind of Democrat to run in Pennsylvania. But what do you think of the health issue?
I mean, the health thing is a major word. Yeah, I mean, I'd feel much better about Pennsylvania if it wasn't for this health issue. And the only way to deal with the health issue is to get out there. And apparently, Bernie Sanders, 79 years old, had a heart attack and recovered politically from it. He lost. He didn't lose because of the heart attack. He lost because he started talking up Castro after winning Nevada.
Even though he did not take my advice. Remember, I wanted him to come on stage at that rally in New York to Motley Crue's Kickstart My Heart. I would have voted for him if he did that.
But Bernie got past that because he got back on the debate stage and he looked good. So, I mean, right now, apparently his wife has said you may not expect him back on the stump until July. I mean, he goes, geez, how bad is he if he can't go back out there? But
it's not only the health issue, and it's not only that he can't campaign vigorously, but he didn't tell us about this. He kept this.
He didn't tell Bill right away.
He downplayed it as well. It feels to me like it wasn't. It was not that transparent.
I think overall, if he's out there in the summer and he looks fine, it'll be forgotten. And he doesn't have another episode of any sort. If I were him, if I was giving the message advice to Fetterman, if the first sit-there interview he does, he's going to get asked this question about transparency. Why weren't you honest with Pennsylvania voters?
Yeah.
If I were him, I'd say, you know what? It's a fair rap. But I also wasn't honest with myself. I was given medical advice 5 years ago. I just didn't want to accept it. I didn't listen to him, and I almost killed myself in the process. I'm not going to make that mistake again. I apologize to the voters of Pennsylvania. I apologize to my wife and family. I'm not going to make that mistake. That's
why you used to work in PR, Bill. Listening to your show. I mean, that opens him up to some criticism, but I think that's about as good of an answer as possible. I like it, even though, it leads people to ask, like, well, what else are you fooling yourself about? But I will say this, I think just he is better equipped, assuming he does recover. He's a big, strong, virile dude. And I'm not saying this is right, but if he was, if he was a lot older, or if he looked like Hillary Clinton, remember when Hillary Clinton, collapsed or fainted or whatever, I think that really did hurt her. And if Fetterman fainted or collapsed, it might not hurt him as much, right? And part of it maybe there's some sexism, but I think it's also just the way he looks, his age, and the fact that he's this like hawking figure, I think plays to his favor when it comes to the health issue. Well,
again, so long as he looks good.
Yeah.
When he's back out there. Hillary did the debates with Trump and she seemed fine. I don't think that was the thing that did her in at the end.
It didn't help her any. Bill, I wanted to ask you, before we move on, I mean, I've been in, I wrote a column at The Beast this week that was very critical of Joe Biden.
Yeah.
I feel like I think it's a legitimate and valid point that I need to keep making, especially to a mainstream / center left audience that may not appreciate all the time that there's a problem and it needs to be fixed. If you want to stop Donald Trump, you better fix this, and Joe Biden had better get things on track.
When you say fix this, what do you mean?
America and the Biden and the Biden presidency.
Well, here's the thing about that. I mean, the challenge that any president has is that they can't fix everything automatically. You get elected on a lot of hope and promises. You inevitably can't do it all, and you have to then run for election and say, "Hey, I didn't do everything, but I did some things, and I'd like to keep doing more things." And by the way, this other guy's insane.
I just had the same debate on CNN with Ryan Lizza. So I'll give you the same spiel I gave him when he said exactly that, which is obviously every president is dealt a hand of cards, and some of those cards are bad, and you just have to play the hand you were dealt. And all that's true, but there's a reason that effective presidents get things done and are able to impose their agenda. And there's a reason why mediocre presidents kind of respond and become victims of the circumstances, right? And really good presidents bounce back. I mean, Bill Clinton is an example of someone who endured all sorts of setbacks and politically speaking was able to flip the script. I just don't think Joe Biden has the leadership abilities or the communication skills. Like he got off to a decent start, but once things came unraveled with Afghanistan, which I will remind you was a choice he made, once that started to happen, I don't think he's had the ability to turn the tables.
Well, no one could have known that for Bill Clinton after he got hammered in 1994, and belly flopped on healthcare. It was tied up in knots over gays in the military. Jocelyn Elders, a Surgeon General, was a point of controversy. I mean, Lonnie Guinier, Kimba Wood. I mean, he had all sorts of mess ups in his first 2 years that he paid a steep price for, and people wondered if he could persevere. Barack Obama had a horrible midterm, and it wasn't clear that he was going to be able to recover from that. I mean, even in the immediate aftermath of that had to tangling with Republicans and having the debt ceiling showdowns and all that kind of thing. In the cases of Clinton and Obama, they had done things, I would argue, that were good for the economy that paid off eventually. They didn't pay off immediately. They paid off eventually. I mean, the economy in 2012 wasn't gangbusters, but it was better than it was, and it was good enough to get reelected. Bill Clinton did the tax hike in 1993, very tough vote, reconciliation bill, party line vote, and went back on in part a pledge in the campaign to do a middle class tax cut, which he did not do. I mean, it was more a tax hike on the wealthy, but he didn't do a middle class tax cut. He was trying to get those Perot voters by taking deficit reduction seriously. And by taking deficit reduction seriously, the Fed complied with lower interest rates, and that helped the economy. So they did things that paid off. Maybe Biden has done things here that are going to pay off. Maybe, again, even if he overshot with the rescue plan, it still prevented the economy from going into the ditch, and maybe the Fed's going to come through. The concern with the Fed coming down hard now with interest rates is that it could trigger a recession. This is what happened with Carter in 1980. Volcker did what he had to do on interest rates. And mind you, Carter appointed Volcker.
Yeah.
Volcker told Carter, hey, I might have to do some tough stuff here. And Carter told Volcker, hey, you do what you have to do, and I'll worry about the politics.
And I respect that and applaud him. And Reagan stuck with that to his credit, and he reaped the benefit. And Reagan, not Carter, but Reagan reaped the benefits. But to his credit, he stuck with it. And that had to be tough as well. I wanted to ask you this question, though, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so right now, Joe Biden should be thankful that he didn't pass Build Back Better. I think he should be thankful it did not happen because of what you're talking about right now. Okay, because of the inflationary, result that would have happened. But politically speaking, Biden obviously wanted to do that. He wanted to put points on the board. He wanted to score legislative wins, and And it came out this week, Bill, that we learned a little more about what transpired between Joe Biden, his staff, and Joe Manchin. And my reading of it is that Manchin and Biden had worked out some sort of a deal, and that the White House, Biden's staff, with Biden's approval, put out some language, some verbiage that Manchin did not want, that he asked them not to do. They did it anyway. This was a time when Manchin felt threatened, that his family was being threatened by activists. And it's either incredibly petty or incredibly stupid what the White House did. And I think it seems like that scuttled the deal. Now, maybe in the long run, Biden should be thankful that that got scuttled. What say you?
I mean, in my opinion, Biden should have taken Manchin's offer. So I don't think having the whole thing blow up in his face is a net positive. Now, the entirety of the Build Back Better plan as originally as passed the House, you know, Biden would argue, hey, this is not an inflationary plan. This pays for itself. The wrinkle in that was it paid for itself over the long term. It had more spending up front, so it could have caused some short-term inflationary issues. But that should be solvable. I mean, like you should be able to work with Manchin to solve that problem and just spread out the allocations differently and pull some of the tax increases on corporations more up front, so you wouldn't have that problem. I mean, clearly, this was Manchin's concern. So I think it would be better if they solve that issue and pass something and put some more points on the board, so they can say, hey, I'm doing things. I'm solving problems.
Let me just ask you, though, about the competence issue, about the inability to work. So there's one guy who's more important in the Senate, in the country. There's one man in the United States of America who is the most important person for Joe Biden's agenda. One man. His name's Joe Manchin. They have to keep one man happy and in the loop and do him some solids. If he needs a favor, maybe you ought to consider doing it. If he wants something in a press release or a statement, maybe you ought to let him have that. Explain to me how a White House lets this fall apart, does this to Joe Manchin.
Look, I wrote a piece at Washington Monthly last week. I think Biden's handling of Manchin has been poor. And you can draw a contrast between how Biden handled his determining vote and how Barack Obama handled his determining votes. Some people say, well, Obama had 60 or close to 60 senators most of the time, so it's totally different. He wasn't playing for reconciliation. He was playing for 60. So he had to win the 60th vote. And of course, those who say, well, Obama and all these senators are the same people that complain that Obama bent over backwards to compromise with Republicans. So the two arguments don't connect. Only one of those things can be true. The fact is, he was playing for 60, and he did what he had to do to compromise with that 60th vote, whether it was Olympia Snowe, Susan Collins, our inspector, with the Recovery Act, whether it was Joe Lieberman and Ben Nelson with Obamacare, whether it was Scott Brown with Dodd-Frank. He did what he had to do to get that vote. And in the case of Biden, you knew on day one of the presidency that Joe Manchin and or Kyrsten Sinema were your 49th and 50th votes. And so there's a lot of focus now on how Biden misplayed this one statement that called out Manchin by name at the end of the negotiations in December. But the bigger sin is, why wasn't there a meeting in January 2021 before they even wrote the original Build Back Better proposal to say, hey, Joe, what do you want? What do you want out of the Senate? What can we do? I know it all goes through you. Tell me what your desires are and what your red lines are, and we'll work from there. What happened was they did the American Rescue Plan first. Joe Manchin was complaining during that process that they were not being bipartisan and weren't working with Susan Collins more. The Biden people said, screw that. We're not going below $1 trillion. We're not taking their, because Susan Collins came with about $600 billion. They said that's not a serious offer. We can get 1.9. Let's do that. And Joe Manchin acquiesced. He negotiated a bit on the margin. He was complaining a bit, but he acquiesced. And so the take rate was, Manchin, he postures, but he's a Democrat. He'll come around at the end. Let's keep doing what we're doing. As opposed to, Manchin did that kind of reluctantly. Maybe I should circle back with him and see where he's at now. And in particular, you have this issue with the child tax credit. I mean, one of the bigger spending items was expanding the child tax credit, which comes out to $100 billion a year. And then the out years, it's more like $200 million a year because Trump's expansion of the child tax credit expires in like 2025, 26. And so you got to add more money to deal with the sunsetting of that expansion. And Manchin and others, as early as March, were saying, I'm not so sure about extending this beyond a year, because only did it for a year in the rescue plan, unless we know how to pay for it. So you already had the rumblings. But then we learn that it is a huge, huge cut in child poverty. It's a fantastic success of a program. And so the Biden thinking, another thinking was, people like this. It's money in their pockets. It's cutting child poverty. Who would get in the way of expansion? We're just gonna expand it, and we'll lean on the people we got to lean on. So, I get the logic on paper, but you can see in retrospect that was the wrong play. You needed to talk privately to your 50th vote or 49th 50th vote and say, hey, where you at? How I hear you're concerned about this. How are you just talking? Are you really that deeply concerned? What do we have to do here? They did Build Back Better with the philosophy of we're just going to do what we want and get the votes after. And so, whatever childish behavior is occurring at the end of the process on both sides. I mean, it seems like Manchin had this whole hissy fit that he didn't have to have. People can say, well, Manchin, he moves the goalposts. He's not a good faith bargainer. It's all his fault. Biden's the guy that wants the bill. Manchin's approval in West Virginia is fantastic. So Manchin's doing what makes sense for him. And you can get mad at him all you want, but if you're the guy who wants to pass the bill, you need to make the guy with the 50th vote happy and figure out what he wants. And of all people, Joe Biden should know this. Joe Biden is not a spring chicken. He has been in negotiations before. He was the guy that Obama was asking to do the negotiations and talking to these determining votes. So it is hard to get your mind around how Biden, of all people, and let's bring it back to the gun issue, if I can sort of jump to another issue here. In the span of less than a week, Joe Biden said Mitch McConnell and John Cornyn are rational Republicans. So I think we're going to get something done here. And then he does a primetime address where he lays out a whole bunch of issues, a whole bunch of proposals that he knows full well Republicans are not going to go for, and then calls it unconscionable that Republicans aren't going to vote on him, and then throws in there as a side, but I want to see what the bipartisan talks do. So I just think Biden is fundamentally a very conflicted person between wanting to be the bipartisan deal maker who brings people together and wanting to be the pugnacious partisan fighter. And it's not, you might say, well, he's always been this bipartisan, but now he's surrounded by all these woke staffers and he's sort of trapped with them. You can go back earlier in Biden's career. You can go back to 2012, lock y'all up in chains. You can go back to 2007 when they had the CNN YouTube primary debate. And remember, a guy had a video question. We want to know if you're going to protect our babies. And he pulls out AR-15. This is my baby. What are you going to do to protect my baby? And Joe Biden says, if that's his baby, he needs help. Like Biden's always had a fight inside, but he's also been a deal maker. I mean, I talked about the whole corn pop story. You have the chain. You carry the chain behind your back. Doesn't mean you have to use the chain. So he's always had this conflict. But over the course of his history, he's been the guy in the room that does the deal. And the one thing that is difficult for him. This is the last thing I'll say. I know I've gone for a while. In the This Will Not Pass book, the new book by Jonathan Martin and Alex Burns, The Times, they have an anecdote in there. I think this is before he's sworn in, or at least very early on. He's talking to Chris Dodd, who's former senator, was in Biden's inner circle, was part of the VP search committee. And Biden's telling Dodd, I want to get in there. I'm not verbatim quotes. I'm the guy that does this. I'm going to get in the room and like do these deals and be the bipartisan guy. And Chris Dodd's like, Joe, you can't be that guy right now. You're the president. You can't go in a room if you don't know what you're walking out with. Presidents can't do that. Other people have to do that, not you. I mean, he wasn't saying Joe Biden don't negotiate. He was saying he can't be the negotiator. Which in one sense I think is fairly sound advice, but I do think it's made him a step removed from what's going on. And so he hasn't walked the line between these two sides of him as well as he could have.
All right. Well, we're coming up on 47 minutes. So I guess we ought to call it a day, but I do want to circle back to one thing, Doug.
Sure. Finish up on the Republican Senate candidates. I mentioned J.D. Vance and Dr. Oz, I think are imperfect candidates. Not saying they can't win. I'm just saying if I wanted to maximize my odds, they're not who I would pick. The most glaring example is Herschel Walker in Georgia. I mean, he's been a total train wreck. I mean, my namesake at the Free Beacon, Brent Scher. Do you know Brent Scher?
I don't personally, but it's certainly on Twitter.
Okay. I mean, I assume all conservatives know each other in Washington. He had a tweet the other day on how, like, the media refuses to admit that Herschel Walker's a strong candidate. I'm like, why are shares always having all these bad takes? What are you talking about? Guy had a cakewalk of a primary. Like I'm not saying he can't win. I'm saying you have not proven he's a strong candidate because he won his primary. That's not evidence. Everything since the primary has kept people like, what is up with this guy? This guy doesn't seem all.
Certainly not a traditional, strong in the traditional sense of being a adept candidate who is, but if I'm looking to maximize my chances in Georgia, Herschel Walker is not my guy. He's got celebrity status. I think he has some charisma and magnetism too. So he's got things going for him, but he also says crazy things and has a background that's very dubious.
Right. I mean, he's admitted to violent episodes and branching, and his wife is accused of ex-wife's brandishing a gun in front of her. So yeah. So that's got to get your word, I think, if you're a Republican. And now we got to look at, who else is coming down the pike. Trump just endorsed Blake Masters in Arizona, who was on record during this campaign touting Ted Kaczynski's Unabomber manifesto. He shouldn't hurt people, but he's got a lot of interesting things to say. He's got a lot of insight. Yeah. I know Tucker Carlson. There's some weird thing on the right with Tucker Carlson. Others saying like, you should train this Ted Kaczynski guy. He's onto something. As if like liberals just said that Bill Ayers, he may have bombed some things, but you know what? He's got some good thoughts in education. That's not what Barack Obama was going to say in 2008. So I don't think that he'd be your best shot in Arizona. Nevada has Adam Laxalt running against a guy named I think it's I have it in front of me here.
The other guy's
Sam Brown.
The other guy's making gains, I hear.
Well, there was a story at NBC suggesting that the polling was narrowing a bit, and that Sam Brown's fundraising was better. and he's winning straw. But he won the state party endorsement in a straw poll. But we know sometimes these straw polls.
That's a shame. Laxalt, and I think there's some weird story about his parentage or something that, you know, something
right.
interesting. But
it's like Pete Dominici's his father or something.
There's something. It was almost like a Liv Tyler type situation, as I recall. But his, correct me if I'm wrong, his grandfather was Paul Laxalt, right? Who was the famed Reagan's best friend in the Senate, and I think a senator from Nevada, as I recall. So it's kind of sad that he did not follow in that tradition.
Pete Dominici secretly fathered a son with Michelle Laxalt, the daughter of Paul Laxalt.
Yeah, it's weird.
But anyway,
things happen on, you know.
Right. But Laxalt, you know, was a pretty conservative guy. He was Nevada Attorney General. He was involved in lawsuits, siding with Trump on 2020. Like the debate in Nevada is Adam Laxalt's like, hey, I filed lawsuits to help Trump win 2020. And Sam Brown says, you missed the filing deadline. you didn't do good lawsuits.
That's great.
And this is a state that Biden won. So if I'm in Nevada, if I'm a Republican, I don't know if I want like a 2020 fraudster being my nominee. And then you have sorry, now I lost my page. There's one other state that I was looking at. New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a place where, you know, the Republicans couldn't recruit Chris Sununu. Now they got to feel basically nobodies. And there's one guy who has the layup now. His name he's a former Brigadier General, Don Bolduc, and he ran before. He's also a 2020 fraudster type. And he's the only guy with any name ID at all. And there's an April poll where he was at 33%. Everyone else was like at 4% or less. Now, of course, things might change. They have a late primary. So yeah, I can't know exactly who's going to be the nominee in all these places, but you have evidence that you're not getting center-right people. Like Cory Gardner, you know, he won in 2014. He was soft-shoeing abortion. He was running ads with windmills behind him. Like, he tailored his campaign to the state. And I don't feel we're seeing that. I mean, as tilted as the race is for Republicans because of Biden's low approval rating and inflation, the Senate map is tilted to the Democrat side, because you have if everything goes the way of 2020, you know, Democrats are defending Biden won seats. Somebody's narrowly won Biden won seats, but Biden won seats. There's no Democrat seat in a Trump state. And there's 2 Republican seats in Biden states, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And here's another one, Ron Johnson, an incumbent, whose favorable ratings are in the 30s in Wisconsin, who just does one conspiracy theory after another. So another guy I think is not a strong candidate.
He's a real piece of work.
So
I still feel, Bill, I know where you're going with this. I just think the political and I think everything you're saying is valid. But I think at the end of the day, no. There will be not every Republican's going to win. Like Herschel Walker, I think obviously is a very weak candidate. But at the end of the day, I think the political environment overwhelms all this other stuff. It
certainly can, and I'm not making a prediction, but we do have evidence of Republicans blowing opportunities. In 2010, again, Tea Party year, they blew it with Sharon Angle in Nevada. They blew with Ken Buck in Colorado. They blew with Christine O'Donnell in Delaware. Delaware is a very blue state, but they had Mike Castle, who was a very moderate Republican, who had won statewide before as a House member. 2012, again, a better year for Democrats, but you still had Todd Aiken and Richard Murdoch blowing it in Missouri and Indiana, states that Obama lost. Like, you can go too far, even in favorable conditions in favorable states. So I agree with you. Like, I can't say this means Democrats keep the Senate, but if I'm thinking of a scenario how Democrats can keep the Senate, this is how, by nominating terrible candidates.
Yeah. There's a joke in there somewhere. There was a comedian, one of those blue collar comedy guys. It wasn't Foxworthy, but he had a joke about hurricanes or something, and the punchline was it's not that the wind is blowing, it's what the wind is blowing. And so maybe that's your hook if you end up if Republicans end up losing because they put some stinkers in there as the nominee.
And we have 1-6 commissions not letting up its work. That's going to be not the risk for Democrats is like why are you harping on this? Well, Donald Trump's harping on this. They might even announce his candidacy soon. And you could say, hey, you're not gonna select some Republicans. You're like Republicans beholden to this guy who's an authoritarian.
I would say the interesting thing is like if you could have Roe versus Wade overturned and these mass shootings, this epidemic of mass shootings that we're currently being plagued with, and Donald Trump jumps in the race, and it doesn't impact the midterms. Mm-hmm. That would be very interesting for Democrats. Like, what do they need? What do Democrats?
They would need there to not be inflation. I mean, that would argue that inflation overrides all these other things. But if I'm a Republican, I'd wish the Supreme Court maybe put a pin on that one and not ruin a good thing that we have going and like save it for another day.
There is no tomorrow, as Apollo Creed says in Rocky III. There is no tomorrow. By the way, Rocky III just celebrated its 40th anniversary last week, I want to say, maybe 2. Anyway, very recently. I will say the best Rocky of all is Rocky III. I feel strongly about this.
So I don't really remember. Mr. T is the best.
Mr. T, that's the one. Mr. T.
I remember Rocky IV. I remember 1 and 2 as well.
They're all great. I'm a fan of the whole catalog, but 3 is the best.
Have you seen Top Gun Maverick?
Not yet, because I was on vacation last week when it came out. But I have plans to see it Saturday, and I'm taking my oldest boy to go. So I understand that it's fairly family friendly.
I've never seen Top Gun. I've never had an interest in seeing Top Gun. I still have an interest in seeing Top Gun. So I realize this wrecks my Gen X cred, but I just have no interest.
It's at this point it would be easy to rag on you, Bill, but you can't see even a quintessential Gen Xer can't. You can't see the entire oeuvre of 90s hits. It's impossible. 80s
hits. You know what I did? I looked at the list of summer movie releases in 1986. I was like, what did I do that summer?
Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
That was June. I definitely saw that. But that Top Gun weekend, the 2 major movies that came out, it was May 16th. It was Top Gun and the Alan Alda movie Sweet Liberty. And I'm pretty sure I saw Sweet Liberty.
I think you made a mistake. I think you made a mistake with that one, but I got you. We've gone on, my man. I got to go write a column, but why don't you? Obviously, you've got that Real Clear Politics piece. Plug some.
Yeah, and I have a piece about Biden's gun address, talking about how he's conflicted between these two sides. That's in the Washington Monthly, and I think I'm going to go try to write something about the recall in San Francisco.
Awesome.
So we'll see how that goes.
I may be writing about that too. So we may have dueling takes, and. Obviously, people should subscribe to youtube.com/Matt Lewis and get these. We were off last week. I was out on vacation. Bill, how's the audio podcast coming? Where are we at on that?
Oh, that's going. That's good.
It's good. So if I go to the purple app on my iPhone and I search for DMZ, do I get it? How do I get it?
Well, let me just see here. I did the things you're supposed to do to get it on.
All right, I typed in DMZ show, and I'm still getting the old blogging heads, which you could still listen to us there, and the odds are that's what you're doing if you're hearing this. We will keep efforting how to get our new audio feed, and we'll tweet it out too.
Yeah. Shoot. I'll get you those links, Matt, and we can tweet them out and put them on Facebook and whatnot. But they should be there at the various places now.
Awesome. All right, everybody, follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show, And we will see you hopefully back here in the DMZ next week.
All right. Take care.
Yeah.